Okay.
Good evening, fellow viewers. Welcome to this 17th session of the Afghan Association of Ontario online program in awareness of racism, discrimination, hatred, and Islamophobia. This is an initiative of the Afghan Association of Ontario to make people in Ontario aware of the evil, what they call it, of the evil of this evil of triangle of evil, what I would say. In this program, we invite people with insight, expertise, or experience to share their insights or their experience or their expertise with the viewers. And today we have a special guest, Sheikh Nayef Abu Qaddum. He is an imam and a khatib, and he used to work with the Toronto Center, but he will explain when we come to it. So, Sheikh Nayef, welcome to the program.
Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you. This program, I would like to mention, is supported by the government of Canada and also partially funded by them. But it's an initiative of the Afghan Association of Ontario, which has been serving the Afghan and immigrant community since 1982. And so, Sheikh Nayef, because we had some technical difficulties, we came live a few minutes late. Maybe we can start.
Great.
I would appreciate if you could say a few words about your background, of how your background in Canada and what you do and what you did.
Sounds good. So first of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm humbled and honored to be joining you all with this session at the auspices of Uncle Durrani. May Allah bless him. He's an excellent man that I got the opportunity to meet a few weeks back. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I'm Palestinian of origin. I was born and raised in Kuwait, and I've spent a great deal of my life here in Canada with my family. Most of my life was concluded with work within the Islamic theology sector. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. For 17 years and counting, we've been serving the Muslim community in Toronto and across Ontario as well with their needs and within the line of khatib work and imam work. Within, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, the time that I was here in Canada, we studied at the University of Ryerson. I'm a graduate of English literature, and I also have a bachelor's from York in philosophy. And we're as well pursuing further Islamic education at the I3 Institute. And we've been working within the Islamic sector ever since, Alhamdulillah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that information. I didn't know the extent of your educational background. It's an honor to have you as a guest, and I would like the viewers to share this program on their social media pages, because the insights from Sheikh Nayef will be so valuable for the community, whether you are watching it live or you are watching later on the replay or through the YouTube channel. And I welcome you to this program. So let's start, Sheikh Nayef. You are an imam. When I look this way, I have some guides here that I follow, and also for the viewers, just so that we have a restricted amount of time, that we utilize it efficiently. So you are an imam and a khatib, and you deal with people of all ages and different backgrounds. In your experience, how many times do you hear people talking about racism, about discrimination, about hatred, about Islamophobia? And what do they say?
That's an excellent question, subhanAllah, and I think it's very relevant to the work that I do. Throughout the years that I've served working as an imam, and most recently enough across different masajid, and most recently enough at my situated position at the Toronto Islamic Center and Community Services, you hear quite often the idea of Islamophobia, discrimination, and racism. In Toronto specifically, throughout my experience, there is a social fabric that exists whereby a sense of fear daunts the Muslim community. And by that, we mean the idea when an unfortunate circumstance occurs by a Muslim or an event that happens across the globe, it tends to carry on towards the side of the globe that we are on. The idea of discrimination and the idea of Islamophobia and hatred, I think they are all synonymous under the slogan of Islamophobia. And of course, that's the main idea that we're trying to hone in on here. The feelings and the sentiments that people have around Islamophobia has risen. And the reason why it's risen is because there's an influx of ideas that are surrounding the Muslim world today. Of that, of course, are the changes that are happening in the Middle East. Of that, of course, are the events of the refugee crisis. Of that, most recently enough, and I think this is very relevant to the organization of AAO, the Afghan Association of Ontario, the recent departure of the American forces from Afghanistan. A lot of that has really triggered an idea of the new emergence of this Islamist kind of governance that is there ready to daunt the world. So with events that happen across the globe, it tends to carry on across Muslims in and of themselves. I remember an incident that actually occurred with me not too long ago. As I was serving at the Toronto Islamic Center, I was outside of the center and I was doing some work on one of the doors that needed maintenance. And I was there inspecting the contractor that was there. And this was during the Iranian Tehran events that happened with Masha Amini, may Allah have mercy upon her, who passed away as a result of the forced
confinement.
Exactly, that was used against her. And so I was dressed in a white thobe, and of course, the symbols of Islam, they show upon me working within the Islamic sector. And I was verbally given an insult by the way I dressed. So the idea of Islamophobia in Toronto specifically, and most predominantly, it exists and it erupts even further upon a worldly event that shapes and takes precedence within people's minds. So, of course, there is a fear, but the fear is only exacerbated with worldly events that take fold.
Oh, I see. Well, that's a great insight that you shared with me and with our viewers. Thank you for that. As an imam and a scholar dealing with many different and diverse Muslim communities, you already touched upon it, but how big a problem is compared to other countries? In Canada, I would assume it's much less, because Canada is an open society. The mainstream Canadian society has accepted the cultural mosaic to make it like a puzzle, where every person or every community can express their identity. But even here, you already touched upon it. How do some people express that kind of discrimination, hatred, and consider the Muslim community in its various colors and diversity and variety as the other rather than them?
That's an excellent question, and I think it carries on, as you said, Uncle Durrani, with the first point that you suggested, which was an excellent point. With respect to how it negatively affects and shapes the understanding of Muslims in Toronto specifically throughout my experience here, oftentimes the kind of hatred comes in the form of either verbal assaults. Throughout my experience, sometimes we even received emails, threatful emails that contained threats and hatred against Muslims, and even things that would denote a severe reality of what a person could perpetuate for themselves of evil against a Muslim community. Throughout my experience, the way people would detox that hatred would be in the force of emails, words, verbal assaults, or even vandalism or discrimination. And a great example that we can actually bring forward here is the Masjid Toronto that is just on Elizabeth Street and Dundas Street in downtown Toronto. That mosque in and of itself, it has a history of being vandalized. It has a history of being broken into and smashed and drawn on with spray paint. And the ideas that surround that are the following. The overall circumstances that shape the world and that shape the idea of Islam, it carries on into how we are viewed in the West. And the reason being is because as Muslims, we are not united as a front. We have many different organizations and many different coalitions that are fighting to actually resolve this difficulty. And of that organization that's doing a great job is the NCCCM, the National Canadian Council of Muslims. I've worked with them, and I've worked with a lot of, with several individuals that were responsible for some of the work that we needed help in during my time at the Toronto Islamic Center. They are doing an excellent job tackling the problem. But I think as Muslims, in order for us to truly repel away that evil, it rests with us. We are the face of how we can make a positive imprint of a worldly event that causes that perpetuator to incline towards evil and to incline towards hatred. When it comes to the grand scheme on a national level, what we can do in order to bring upon that change, I think it begins with Muslim communities coming together and forming one coalition that unites the force of a common struggle that Muslim communities are facing across different masajid. And there are many different masajid here in Toronto, Masjid Toronto, for example, the Toronto Islamic Center. And there are also other Muslim individuals, Muslim shops as well, that might be prone to this kind of hatred. So the example here that I want to propound is the idea that as Muslims, we should not have a fear of representing our Islam and representing our belief. And secondly, we must not resort to this idea of fear and this idea of pandemonium, because it creates loss and it creates a sense of disfigurement within the overall framework of the ummah. And that's why we find that throughout my experience, there's a lot of Muslims that had this fear of, I'll give you an example. At the Toronto Islamic Center, we have the practice whereby during Fajr prayer, we would actually lock the mosque as soon as the prayer starts. And during the last prayer, which is the Isha prayer, we would actually lock the masjid after we have concluded the first 2 rak'at of the 4 mandatory units of prayer. So the idea here is that we should not create a sense of fear based off of what we have consumed and what we have seen. There's a difference between being cautious. We should be cautious, and we should take the essence of what we should do in order to protect ourselves. But we need to be that righteous example. And I think, inshallah, as an ummah and as a community here in Toronto specifically, I'm just speaking within my humble experience here in Toronto, we are doing that, but we need to try and become that righteous example when an event happens that is unfortunate, that would shape the understanding of the communities around us. And oftentimes this is not done. This is not done.
In your opinion, we are, so I have interviewed many people, and luckily some people from the Muslim community said that they have never experienced this kind of discrimination or hatred, etc. They were lucky. And we also know that the government policies, the mainstream Canadian society is an open society, and compared to some other Western societies, it's much open, more receptive. But still, there are some rotten apples in the basket, and we try to kind of isolate them, hopefully in one way or another make them aware that this is the wrong way to look at civic activities, at community, and in a multicultural society in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, in terms of equity, etc., which is now a kind of policy on both organizational and corporate level, and then society at all, and including the government. What do you think the role of religious community organizations and other non-religious community organizations are in order to prepare the members so that they can be a good representative of the communities and be good ambassadors, and therefore inspire others to be more receptive to it? Like, what do you think their role should be? How should they deal with community members, especially the youth?
That's an excellent question. And this is one of the challenges that I actually faced during my time working at the Toronto Islamic Center. Unfortunately, within the enmeshed fabric of Toronto, I would say Canadian masajid and Canadian Muslim organizations, there is a major deficit and major deficiency within the idea of bridging communities and bridging different masajid together. And the stemming disease behind that is the monopolization of different masajid, the monopolization of organizations that are very cynical and that are led by the idea of chronism. The idea of chronism is, in essence, bringing in a person that you know, that could be from your own family, or that could be your best friend, or that could be someone that you've shared time with or traveled with, who's your buddy, bringing them in roles and bringing them in positions that do not befit the nature of their skills, their expertise, or even the level of age that they are at. Because as we mature and as we grow in our lives, our energy begins to whittle down. So we have individuals today in our Muslim organizations and in our masajid that are the reason why we don't have a common understanding as to the struggles that we are facing. Ideas like discrimination, racism, Islamophobia, hatred. We don't have a plan. We don't have a framework. And I say this throughout my 17 years of experience working within Islamic theology and having led prayers until today across different masajid. Masajid today are and organizations as well, they're monopolized by people who only care about their own selfless interests, who do not have a framework of bridging different masajid together. Hence, we are left in a loss as an ummah in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, that does not know what each community is struggling and how we can offer our resources to them. When it comes to governmental resources, we have governmental resources such as the security packages that the municipal government releases out to different masajid. The Toronto Police Services, they actually have a program where they release funding for security work and security framework and security assurance for different Muslim communities that are facing their own struggles of hatred and Islamophobia. The idea here is that we should not rest upon external support. As an ummah, we have that support, but we are failing in bringing communities together, forming a coalition that is purely sincere for the interest of safety and inclusion and diversity of other communities, because as an ummah we also have racism within our communities. You know, the Arab might not get along with another individual, and the South Asian or the Afghani or the Indian or the Mexican will not get along with different communities. And the reason why is because we are failing in bridging our communities together. And the idea that surrounds that is the idea of chronism. You know, an outsider that comes in and proposes an idea will be shunned down, will be casted. So the question here that begs itself is, what are we doing to prepare ourselves? The answer is absolutely nothing, because as a Muslim community today, we are not prepared. So it's the failure of bridging Muslim communities and organizations together upon a single framework that allows us to understand the shared struggles across the national board, and the failure of that as per the idea of chronism. Our masajid and our Muslim organizations are monopolized. They only think about money. They have made it a business hub center. And if an outsider proposes an idea or change for them to seek differences upon the common interest and the common majority vote and sphere of influence that exists across the masjid, it is brought down and it is shunned down. And throughout my experience, I have faced that. And it troubles me. Because when we go through tragic moments, like the unfortunate attacks that happened in London, Ontario, where 6 innocent Muslims were taken down. What happened? What occurred in order for that to be avoided? What kind of understanding or security framework that occurred that could reassure us that we have all the resources ready to protect ourselves? A recent event that happened at the Toronto Islamic Foundation, where Sheikh Yusuf Badat, he was taken down by a mentally unstable brother. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him shifa. But the idea here is that the tone that takes precedence after events of this sort, they are not tones that show that we have actually done our part to prevent these unfortunate events. They are only tones of, you know, I was hurt and this was not what should have happened, and we need to do more, and we need to establish more, and we need to build more to protect ourselves and to protect our communities. And throughout my experience, there's very, very little attention or heed that is taken into consideration when it comes to the safety of Muslims and when it comes to bridging the gaps that exist across different Muslim organizations and boards. And the disease behind that is selfless chronism. We are only doing what we want for ourselves because the president wants to remain president for the rest of his life. The secretary wants to be known as a secretary for the rest of his life. And there is no young energy. Uncle Durrani, you mentioned a very beautiful point, and I really love when you mentioned how can we reintegrate the youth into our Muslim work. The reality of the matter is that they are not being integrated. They are actually leaving Islam. We are actually facing questions of atheism. We have young Muslims today who have left the deen of Allah. Why? Because they are not finding a sense of belonging within the sphere of their community, because the individuals who are running the show, they are too advanced in their age where they cannot relate to the average individual, the average youth that wants his concerns or her concerns heard. Hence, they find a sense of belonging elsewhere in the streets, and oftentimes it is always the wrong paths that lead. The level of gang violence that exists in Toronto, the level of Muslims, and I know this for a fact, the level of Muslims that are engaged in gun violence, in gangs, in trafficking, in drug trafficking is surmountably high, to the point where we hear more of our own kinds being victims and suspects than anyone else. And to us as a Muslim community, that begs the question of what are our Muslim communities on their own doing to protect that innocent young man and young woman that are looking for a sense of belonging and that are looking for a sense of assurance within their own communities. So we have failed in that regard, but inshallah, we hope that the generation can kind of regurgitate itself by understanding the current generation. I want the current generation of Muslim organizations and mosques who have spent so much time being in roles for the sake of esteem and for the sake of prestige and for the sake of rank and being known as a president. It is time for them to ask the question of, do I have the energy to address the concerns of today's problems for those who require more energy? And hence, that is the youth, or should we leave? Yeah. And for me, I have noticed that many organizations need to revamp, inshallah, their work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are two schools of thought when it comes to the youth and the community. One of them, school of thought, is that we have to ghettoize our youth and our community, not to integrate with the mainstream, to stay away from the mainstream, then they will be protected. The other is to strengthen the faith and the belief system of our youth, to strengthen their character, and then let them loose in the society so they become ambassadors of the faith. And through their virtuous activities, they can then convince the rest of the society that they can be positively receptive to the Muslim community here. Between these two, I would like to see your insights.
That's a beautiful point. And oftentimes as Muslims, we have this idea that Islam cannot conform with reality, that the idea of how an individual dresses with the beard and the symbols of faith, they cannot conform and adapt to the real challenges of this world. In Islam, that idea does not actually exist. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, in Surah Al-Isra. I'll give you examples, for example. Allah Azza wa Jalla, He says, وَلَا تَنْسَ نَصِيبَكَ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا in Surah Al-Isra. وَأَحْسِنْ كَمَا أَحْسَنَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands the believers in the Quran, in Surah Al-Isra, and do not forget your share of this world. وَأَحْسِنْ, and do good to God through the work that you do for yourself in this dunya, as God has done good upon you by giving you the light and the beacon of torch for people to see hope in, so that they are able to become receptive to you by it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا نُودِيَ لِلصَّلَاةِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْجُمُعَةِ. O you who have believed, if the call of prayer is called upon Jumu'ah, فَاسْعَوْا, then leave your business, leave your lives, leave your trades, and proceed to the remembrance of God. That is better for you only if you knew. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He strikes a balance in that ayah, in the very same chapter in Surah Al-Jumu'ah. God strikes a balance and He says, once you have left your Salatul Jumu'ah, once you have left my worship and my obligations, فَاسْعَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then return to the land. فَانْتَشِرُوا. Allah tells us, disperse to the land and seek from the providence and the bounties of your Lord. But then God reminds us, وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, and remember God in abundance, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that you might and you may succeed in your worldly affairs and in your spiritual affairs. The idea that God gives us in the Quran and the Sunnah of our beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa barak is the idea that you as a Muslim, your iman is not perfected unless you are able to conflate two ideas, your spirituality with your existence. So the idea of Muslims cannot work, Muslims cannot obtain higher ranks, Muslims cannot be involved in politics, Muslims cannot work within different roles within the government. These are all ideas that need to be re-examined, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells in the Quran, in Surah Yunus, that He has made us as vicegerents on earth. So the idea of being a khalif, of being a vicegerent, it carries two symbolic ideas, two symbolic notions. One, it is your iman. who you are, the belief system that grounds you. And two, the activism, the proactive mechanism that allows for others to see that perfect brand of faith that brings everyone together upon a universal ethical God that allows for you to fixate your life, to stabilize your affairs, and to be able to get the most out of God's kingdom. And that is the essence and the nature of God in the Quran and the nature of Islam within the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone that discards that idea has simply not understood the story of our beloved, peace and blessings be upon him, nor understood the Quran. And oftentimes this mentality, throughout my experience, it exists with Muslims that carry a very rigid and robust and
dogmatic,
a very unstable mindset about Islam, where the woman cannot work, where the woman cannot study, where the woman cannot pursue higher education. And all of that, it affects the idea and the way that we are also viewed as a Muslim community. A perfect example is Afghanistan. You know, within the fall of the government there and the rise of the current government, we have this idea where women cannot occupy certain roles and women cannot do certain things, and women need to remain in the house, and women need to be covered completely without showing anything. Now in Islam has different rulings when it comes to different circumstances. So the idea here, it is not that Islam prevents one from integrating with the world. In fact, it is an obligation. It is a spiritual obligation from God for a Muslim and a Muslimah to connect with their life. And that is by engaging with people. But it is the ignorance of the literature and wrongly taking it from those who have lived a traditional, nomadic kind of rigged Islam that has ruined the perception of the Muslim himself and herself, and has allowed for others to look at us and say, what are these people doing? What are these nomads doing? What are these very disoriented people doing with their lives?
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for sharing your insights on this. I would say that the largest population, Muslim population, is in Southeast Asia.
Right.
In Indonesia and Malaysia and that part of the world. And those people did not embrace Islam through futuhat and through fightings, etc. They did it because there were some Muslims who went there and dealt with those people, and through their character, they were good ambassadors of the faith.
Exactly.
The locals, they embraced Islam. And I think this will be a good example for our Muslim community organizations, is if we can train our youth and our community members to be that kind of ambassadors.
Right.
It will not only, and then let them interact in the society, let them participate in the civic activities, similar to what the Muhajirs were told in Yathrib, in Medina, to participate in the civic activity of the city of Yathrib, which became Medina. Right. So if the Muslim community organizations can do that to our youth, and give them, of course, to strengthen their character and their faith, but then let them get involved in the society, this will be the best long-term way to fight Islamophobia, to fight racism, and to fight discrimination, and also to embrace what they call it, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Beautifully said, mashallah. That's the way. That's exactly the way. That's exactly the way, mashallah.
Well, thank you very much for your participation. Do you have any last words that you might say to the viewers?
Yes, to the viewers, inshallah, I have a few reminders. The first reminder, inshallah, would be for us as Muslims not to forget the epaulet of faith, to work on ourselves and to ensure that if there is any ignorance that we don't understand about our faith, if we are living in a bubble where we feel that life is getting the best out of us, ask yourself the question, where are you branding yourself by? Where is your heart connected to? So the importance of tazkiyah, self-rectification, purifying yourself from sin, purifying yourself from any worldly attachment and attaching yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the life story, the epaulet and the epitome of perfection, the life of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. This is the kind of generation that we want to foster within our ummah. We want to have a generation of young Muslim women and young Muslim men that are proud to be Muslims, that are sincere about their faith to God, that are proactive in politics, that are proactive in literature, that are proactive in drama, that are even proactive within the parameters of rhythms and nasheed and vocals and instruments. We need that kind of understanding. We need Muslims who are proficient in the field of sports. We need Muslims who are proficient in the field of entrepreneurship and startups and IT and technology and in business as well. We need much of that today in the ummah, and that will not solidify itself. That example will not solidify itself unless we understand the importance of attaching ourselves to the brand that will perfect us, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in line within the methods of our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The second point that I want to mention, inshallah, and I will conclude with this and I will send it back to Uncle Durrani, is the importance of understanding and acknowledging the following. You don't need to have a beard to be active within your faith. You don't need to wear this. You don't need to wear this white garb that I'm wearing. You don't need any of this. In fact, God does not even care about any of this. God looks at what is in our hearts, and God looks at the sincere deeds that we are doing within the line of specialty that is allowing for us to protract an example that would allow for others to look at us and say, wow, these Muslims are very proficient in what they do. Muslims are very smart in the field of IT. Muslims are actually giving, they're donating, they're fundraising equipments for hospitals, they're building hospital wings, surgery wings, they're building different kinds of medical facilities that are not just only for themselves, but for the grand nationalistic level of the country that they're in. And that is the example that we want to serve, inshallah. We want to build Muslims that are badged within the honor of Islam, that allows for them to be saved from the trials and tribulations of this world. But we also want each and every single one of us to understand that you don't need to be a hafiz, you don't need to know a hadith, you don't need to know sharia, you don't need to know Islam to the greatest extent, you don't need to be a sheikh or a scholar or any of these, all these names that mean absolutely nothing, wallahi, that mean absolutely nothing. You need to be a Muslim that understands the importance of submitting yourself to the will of God and working on that will through the passage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and hence unlocking yourself by knowing what you are good at, that would allow for others to see you as a proponent of change and prosperity for the world, not just for yourself, but for the world as a whole. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Prophet in the Quran. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And O Muhammad, we have not sent you except as a mercy to mankind, not لِلْمُسْلِمِينَ لِلْعَالَمِينَ, so to all of mankind. And this is time immemorial until the day of becoming, the day of reckoning occurs. And what greater way, inshallah, to unlock yourself than with Uncle Durrani, mashallah, who's a specialist in that, and who has been helping many people, mashallah, throughout his life unlock their potential through his own program and his own, mashallah, very prestigious skill set. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you for being that foundation for the ummah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, viewers, for your time. As I mentioned, whether you are watching this program live right now or you're watching the replay in Facebook or in the YouTube channel, this will be uploaded to the YouTube channel, and then you can watch it. And as you saw, there were very important insights from Sheikh Nayef we had today. Please share it with all the other people, and not just the Muslim community, the youth, but also any friends that you have outside the Muslim community. And thank you very much. Until next time, I wish you all the blessings of God and Happy New Year. We live in Canada and we have New Year coming. So I want you to have a prosperous 2023 and perhaps a good New Year evening also.
Inshallah.
And thank you, Sheikh Nayef, for your time, for your insights, for your experience and your expertise in this area. And I just want to acknowledge again that this program is an initiative of the Afghan Association of Ontario in collaboration with and partial funding of the Government of Canada. Until next program, thank you very much and have a wonderful time.
Sure.